A couple of years ago, I was traveling with my best friend Charlotte. We have traveled together several times now, but this was by far the scariest thing that ever happened. After our flight, we booked a hotel not too far away for the entire time that we were staying. We took an Uber there, and the hotel was pretty average for the most part. It was nothing fancy, but also nothing was really bad about it either. It was clean, and the staff was friendly, and they had a continental breakfast as well. So, I remember after being out for most of the first day, Charlotte and I got back to the hotel sometime at night. We were hanging out in the room when we noticed this one guy out the window. Our room was on the second floor, and it overlooked mostly the parking lot that was behind the hotel. It was not too busy because there was another parking lot out front where most of the people parked. The man was standing sort of at the far back of the parking lot, almost at the end of it, and he appeared to be looking right at us. Our window was not open, but we did not have any shades covering the window, so it seemed like the man could see into the room. We looked at him, and he was definitely looking right at us. The guy appeared to be somewhat short, had a goatee and sort of long hair. He motioned to us, but I couldn't quite tell what he was doing. We were both kind of confused as to what he wanted. Then we heard him yell something at us, but I couldn't make it out. Our window was closed, and he wasn't quite loud enough. Then he pointed at us and said something else. He didn't necessarily seem angry or anything, but it was just kind of weird. Then, after pointing at us for like 10 seconds, the man started to jog through the parking lot closer to the hotel. It seemed like maybe he was going to go inside. We were a little concerned that he might go to our room or something, and the whole thing was kind of weird, so we decided to cover the windows at that point. About 5 minutes later, we heard a knock on our door. We got completely silent, and then I went over as quietly as I could and got to the door. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the man was standing there. We did not know what he wanted. He stood by the door and kind of looked around. After staying at the door for like 15 or 20 seconds, the man then moved along and walked away. We thought that we heard him knocking on another door, so maybe he didn't quite know which room was ours. Either way, it was kind of strange, and we weren't sure what the guy was doing. There's no way that we were answering the door for him though. So the rest of the night was fine. We hung out a while longer and then went to sleep. The next morning, Charlotte and I went down to the first floor for the continental breakfast. When we got there were quite a few other people. However, right after arriving, we noticed the same guy. He was standing on the far other end of the room holding a cup of coffee. As soon as we saw him, he seemed to see us. Then he started walking over in our direction. Charlotte and I both had a really bad feeling about the guy, so we decided to just go back to the room. We quickly turned around and went back. After getting back to the room, we decided to just leave the hotel and go on with our plans for the day. When we left the hotel, we didn't see the man. We were gone for the whole day and arrived back sometime that night. I remember that things were quiet by that point. We walked through the lobby and then went up to the second floor to get to our room. As we were walking down the hallway to our room, we heard someone at the far other end of the hall. I didn't really think anything of it, but I looked over and then noticed that the man was there. He was walking in our direction and also walking really fast. Charlotte noticed too and tried to hurry up and put the key in the door. She got it open and we both quickly went inside. We slammed the door shut behind us. Probably 10 seconds later, the man arrived at the door and tried to open it. Then he quickly knocked on the door. We called down to the front desk and reported the man. He walked away from the door after we didn't answer again. We were nervous that we would keep seeing him, but he didn't come back that night and we didn't see him the next day or for the rest of our trip. I guess either the hotel staff found him and kicked him out or something, or maybe he just realized that we wanted nothing to do with him and left. Either way, I'm really glad that he never got into the room, and I'm glad that we never answered the door for him. Two years ago, I was driving back from Oklahoma, and it was a pretty long drive. I would be stopping and staying overnight at a hotel, and I decided to just find a cheap one. I'm not a picky person, and for just one night of travel, I just chose to stay in a pretty crappy motel. This is something that I probably won't do again though. I just figured at the time I would have a bed, a TV, and a place to sleep for the night. Plus, I would be saving money. It didn't seem like a big deal, so I drove until about 9 p.m. and then came across a small town. It wasn't a large city or anything, and honestly I have no clue where it was. But I figured that it would be a good time to stop, because I didn't know where the next city would be. I drove until I found this cheap motel on the edge of the city. Right away it looked kinda sketchy, and like there was nobody else there. But I didn't care. I figured, what could happen? I'm just staying here one night. so I parked my car and then went to the office and got a room. It was cheap, only $40 for the night, and I got a key to one of the rooms. The motel was 2 levels and had the standard small rooms that would open up to a sidewalk that was just in front of the parking lot. The parking spaces went almost right up to the room doors. So I got my room, which was on the 1st level. I'm not sure how many other people were staying there that night, but if I had to guess, it was less than 5. So after making it to my room, I looked around and was pleasantly surprised. Nothing seemed too dirty or anything. The bed was decently comfortable and the cable TV worked fine. It wasn't that large or the greatest quality, but I felt good knowing how much money I was saving. Had I been traveling with somebody else, I probably would not have stayed there, but for just me, it was cool. Even though it was nighttime, I really wasn't that tired, so I just got into bed and started watching TV and relaxing. Probably 30 minutes later or so, I remember hearing a really loud car engine. I thought it was a truck because it sounded almost like a diesel engine. It got louder and then sounded like it was literally right outside my room. I ignored it at first, but the sound continued for a good 10 or maybe even 20 minutes. After a while, it was getting annoying, so I got up and walked over to the window. The window to the room was completely covered by the shades. I pulled them back a little to see that there was an old beat-up looking car parked right out in front of my room. The car was rather small, looked to be from the mid-1990s, and had some noticeable duct tape on it. I was kind of annoyed because there were so many empty parking spaces in the lot. Why was somebody parking right in front of my room and running their loud engine for so long? But I guess you get what you pay for, and I paid just $40 for the room that night. I was starting to regret my decision already, because I could have easily afforded a better hotel, but I was just being cheap. But overall, it wasn't a huge deal to me, so I went back to the bed and continued watching TV. After a little while, the engine to the car turned off, and things were quiet again, so I paid it no mind. A short time later, though, I was sure that I heard somebody trying to open the door to my room. It was very quiet and I barely heard it, but there was also really no mistaking it. I had a bad feeling, and I got up from the bed and slowly walked over to the window first. When I did, I looked and nobody was there. So either I was just hearing things or whoever had tried to enter my place had left. I went back to the bed again and tried to forget about it. Things went well for the next hour or so. I still wasn't tired, but got pretty hungry as well as thirsty. I knew there was a vending machine up the stairs, so I decided to leave my room to get something. After grabbing a few dollars, I left the room and went outside. Things were very quiet out there, and I didn't see anybody at all. So I walked over to the gap between the 2 buildings and went up the stairs. At the 2nd level, up against one of the buildings, were 2 vending machines. As I approached them, I noticed somebody was outside of the rooms on the 2nd level. However, I didn't look closely at them and I didn't pay them much attention. So I went to the vending machine and made my selections. Afterwards, I turned around to leave, and I saw the man who had been standing outside of the rooms. It was the same guy who had been at my door. The guy was at the end of the walkway on the 2nd level, and had been there the whole time that I was there. He appeared to just kind of be standing around, and after noticing me, I saw him start to walk in my direction. I didn't know if he was going over to me or if he was just moving in my direction. I was already moving to go to the stairs though. I didn't stop around to wait, and I kept going. I went back down the stairs, took a left, and then headed back to my room. When I got back, I quickly went inside and locked the door. Then I sat back down. It was maybe 2 minutes later when I heard a knock on my door. I got up, went over to the window, and carefully looked out. That same guy was there. He was acting really suspicious, and I didn't know what he wanted. I thought maybe he was staying in one of the rooms upstairs, but why would he knock on my door? There was no way I was answering it, so I just stayed in my room and hoped that he would go away. He knocked one more time though, and I still did nothing. After maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, I heard the loud car starting right outside my room. I went over to the window and looked out, and then saw the guy driving away. I was glad that he was gone. For the rest of the night, he did not return, and when I got up the next morning, he wasn't there either. Looking back, I don't know what was going on there, but I think that the guy was being really suspicious. I'm never staying in a cheap motel like that again. Years ago, I used to work at a fairly nice hotel. It was not 5 stars or 4 stars, but it was a pretty good quality hotel. The rooms were nice, and there were a decent amount of meeting rooms and things like that. Most nights there would be quite a few people staying there. When I worked there, I would do just a bit of everything. Whatever I was asked to do, really. Most of the time I would move stuff like equipment. Other times I would clean meeting rooms or set stuff up. and I would also work at the restaurant that was in the hotel sometimes. One night, I was working kind of late. I think that I got off at like midnight. I got done with working on something, and then I remember that my boss came up to me and told me something. He said that guests were reporting a man out in the parking lot who was harassing them, asking for money. My boss then asked me to see what was going on and to ask the guy to leave if he was still there. So I left the hotel and I walked out into the parking lot. I was kind of nervous because it was not the usual type of task that I would do. I had never been told to ask somebody to leave before. The parking lot was fairly large and also had quite a few cars in it. We were near some restaurants and some other businesses that were down the road, so I figured whoever was walking around the parking lot harassing people had walked over from someplace. I looked around the parking lot and at first saw nothing. I was hoping that the man was gone, but it only took me walking out a few more steps to notice him. There was a somewhat young-looking man with brown hair and a rough-looking beard. He was wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and was barefoot and was standing near the other end of the parking lot. I obviously worked at the hotel and I started to approach him. I called out to the man, asking what was going on out there. The guy turned and started to walk away. He did not leave though, but just moved behind some cars. I continued to walk over to him. The guy was now sort of hiding from me behind vehicles, and when I got closer, I called out to him again. He did not answer me. I told him that we had reports that someone was out there harassing guests at the hotel. The man then came out from behind a car a ways away and seemed angry. He said that he was not harassing anyone. I said that we had reports somebody was asking people for money and stuff, and asked if he knew anything about it. The man then admitted it was him, and said that asking people for money is not a crime. I told him that we couldn't have him asking our guests for money, and the guy started being difficult. He kept saying that he did nothing wrong. The man was overall giving me a tough time, and was not seeming reasonable. I said that guests were complaining, and that he would have to leave. I told him to go off our property, and then he got into this whole thing claiming that it was public property because it was a parking lot. First, the man said that if I gave him money, he would then leave, but I was not going to do that. He then said that he was not moving and I could call his lawyer. I tried to reason with him. The man was not having any of it though. So then I threatened to call the cops. That's when the guy got mad and started shouting. He was cursing at me, saying that I was harassing him and all that. I started to walk away from the guy. He stayed where he was, and I hoped that he would leave, but I went back inside and told my boss what happened. My boss said that we would have to call the police. So we both went outside to find the man was still there. So we called the cops and then waited for them to arrive. When they got there, they couldn't get the guy to leave either, and he started making a scene, so he got arrested for trespassing. He was also found to be in possession of meth, so I'm sure he got in trouble for that too. However, the story doesn't end there. I continued working at the hotel like normal. It was only like a week, maybe a week and a half later, when I had another late night shift. I got off work a little bit after midnight. I started heading to my car, which was in the back parking lot. When I was walking to my vehicle, I saw someone come out from behind a nearby car. I realized that it was the same guy from before. He looked really angry and immediately came out from behind a vehicle and started charging at me. I just turned around and ran back for the hotel. I sprinted as fast as I could and made it back inside. I used my key fob to open the door, and it was the back door, which is locked at all times, so the man was not able to get inside that way. After getting back in, I called the police right away. The man was already banned from our premises from before, so he was trespassing. It seemed as though he had been planning to attack me or something. As I was inside the hotel, I told a few coworkers and was waiting for the police. Several minutes later, the man came into our main lobby of the hotel. He started yelling and cursing about the hotel and employees. He was clearly mad about what happened before. I stayed away from him and was in the back, and most people tried to keep away from him as well. He stayed in the lobby shouting until the police got there. Then he was arrested for trespassing again. After that night, I never saw the guy again. I worked at the hotel for maybe another 3 or 4 months. I was kind of worried that he would go after me again or something. Thankfully, he never did. This is a sort of foggy memory because it happened a really long time ago when I was a kid. However, I still remember some of the details very well, and I don't think I will ever forget them. So, it was sometime in the late 1990s, and I was like 12. I was on a road trip with my family. It was my parents, my aunt and uncle, my younger brother, and my 2 older cousins. We had 3 hotel rooms for all of us. My parents had one, my aunt and uncle had another, and then the 4 of us kids had our own room. The oldest was my cousin Sherry, who was probably 16 at the time. I remember that after we got to the hotel room, it was a lot of fun. Us kids were just watching TV and hanging out and had some games. Our parents told us to go to bed by I think 11 because we were planning to hit the road early the next morning. Of course, we wanted to stay up late, and without parents' supervision, we were playing games and having popcorn as well as watching movies. I'm pretty sure we stayed up until like 1 a.m. As it got to be pretty late though, after midnight, we tried to quiet down so that our parents wouldn't hear that we were still awake. Things around the hotel had gotten much quieter as well. We had the volume lower for the TV and were still watching movies and having popcorn. My brother was playing on his Game Boy in the corner of the room. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this really creepy and weird sounding laugh coming from the hallway. It sounded like a man laughing, but was just really strange sounding. It gave me the creeps instantly, and I had a bad feeling about it, but maybe that was just because it was so late at night. But us kids being in the room whispered to each other about it, wondering what it was. After like 30 seconds of hearing the laughter on and off, it finally stopped. After that, all of us went over to the door and one at a time looked through the peephole into the hallway, but nobody was there. It gave us all the creeps because of how weird the laughter sounded, and there were no other voices in the hallway, just this one guy laughing. We went back to what we were doing after that, just brushing it off for the most part. However, maybe 20 minutes later, we heard the laughter again. It was coming from what sounded like right outside the door. I was the closest to the door, sitting on the edge of one of the beds, so I got up and walked over to the door. I looked through the peephole and I saw a man there. He was really creepy looking. I just remember that he had these really wide eyes and a big forced grin on his face. The man was not looking directly at our door, but sort of in the direction of it. He was laughing this really creepy and insane sounding laugh. Then he sort of turned and took a few steps in one direction, only to turn back and walk towards our door again. Sherry had made it to the door and asked what I saw. I had to stop looking because I was so creeped out, so then she looked and whispered that it was really strange. The man then slowly walked away down the hallway. The laughter then stopped. We heard it one more time about 10 minutes later, but it wasn't as loud. It was very weird, and other than that, everything seemed completely silent. Soon thereafter, we decided to go to bed. I found it difficult to sleep though. We didn't hear the guy at all anymore, and eventually I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, we all got up and went to the hotel breakfast before leaving. I remember that there was a room with some tables and food for breakfast, and a bunch of other people were there as well. They also had some other furniture and decorations in the room, and when I was there, I saw some framed pictures on the wall. Most were simple pictures like paintings of landscapes or whatever, but they had a few pictures of people. Looking back, I don't know why, and in one of the pictures, it was several people standing outside together, like a group of people. I have no idea who they were, but one of the guys in the photo I recognized as the man who had been laughing in the hallway. I was sure that it was him. I showed my cousins, and they all agreed. It was so creepy. We told our parents about it, and they hadn't heard the man because they had all been sleeping. They told us that it was probably some drunk guy going back to his room. Overall, they didn't seem too concerned. But after seeing the guy in the picture, it just seemed really weird. We left soon after and went on with the road trip. That's something that I wish I knew more information about now. I wish I would have found out what group of people that picture was and who the man was. He wasn't really acting drunk in my opinion. It was like he was trying to be as creepy as possible. When I was younger, my family used to own this motel, and I worked there for a while. They sold it several years ago, which I'm happy about, because I didn't really like working there. Being a motel, I would see a lot of sketchy people in my time there. I would also have to work overnight shifts a lot of the time, and usually nothing much happened. I would just sit behind the counter, and I would feel pretty safe, because there was glass walls separating you from the customers. One night, I was working, and it was really late at night, probably like 11 p.m. A man walked into the office and approached me. He looked sketchy from the start, but many people who stayed at our motel did. It was a cheap motel, so it didn't make me suspicious or anything that he was there. The guy walked up and then asked for a room for the night. I told him the price and stuff, and he paid in cash. Then I gave him the key to the room and told him the room number and all that. He took the key and walked out. I went back to what I usually did, which was going online on the computer there at the desk and playing games and stuff. About 10 minutes later though, the door opened again, and I saw that the same man was back. He told me that he needed help and he couldn't get his key to work. I told him the room number again and made sure that it was the correct room. He said yes it was, and said that the key would not work no matter what he did. Then he asked me if I could help him. I looked at the key and it looked like it should be working. We had had some problems though in the past because, like I said, we were a cheap motel. I was annoyed and I figured that I would just see for myself, so I told the man I would try it out. I left my room behind the counter and walked outside with the guy. The motel had rooms that opened up right outside and mostly to the parking lot. It was very quiet out and there was woods next to the parking lot. The man's room was supposed to be towards the end of the building. I walked down there with him and noticed a large white van was parked right in front of the room. I figured that was his. We walked over to the door of the room and the man gave me the key. As I tried the key, the door instantly opened right away. It was like there was no problem at all. But then, right as the door opened, I felt the man start to push me from behind. He shoved me inside the room and I hit the door, went inside, and then fell down. The man then entered the room. He quickly turned and was closing the door and locking it, and during that time I knew what I had to do. Working at a sketchy motel, I was not completely unprepared. I had never been in a situation like that before, but I always carried a stun gun with me just in case. I got it out of my pocket and I quickly got to my feet. Then I went for the man. He had just finished locking the door when I reached him, and I got him with the stun gun pretty good. The man didn't seem to expect it and moved to the side a little. I pushed him and he hit the wall. I quickly opened the door, left the room, and ran back for the office. When I got inside, I locked the door and called the police. I told them what happened and was able to look out of the window and see the man getting into his van. Then he quickly left, screeching the tires. When the police got there about 5 minutes later, I gave them a description of the man and his vehicle. They located him a short time later. After that event, I took some time off, and about 2 years later, my family finally sold the motel. That was by far my scariest experience working there. My friend Anna and I were staying in an old motel in the middle of Nebraska for the night. We were on a 1-week-long camping trip, checking out national parks and camping out in nature. However, this particular night, there was a huge rainstorm coming. We decided that it would be smart to stay in a hotel room for tonight to avoid a terrible stormy night of sleeping and having all our gear getting soaked. The closest motel we found was a small cheap strip of rooms in the middle of nowhere. We bought our room for the night from the redneck-looking guy working at the front desk. The rain started early in the evening, so we ended up staying in our room all night, drinking and playing some games to pass the time. Anna and I went to bed around midnight, and it was easy to fall asleep to the sound of the downpour of rain coming down all around us. I woke up at some point in the night, not exactly sure by what, but I noticed there was light pouring into our room. I sat up in bed and glanced towards the door where the light was coming from. We had chain-locked the door where it could be opened just a crack, and as I was fully awake now, I realized that's where the light was coming from. The slim shiver of light shone all the way into the room, stretching its way across the floor to the foot of my bed. A quick glance over at the bed next to me confirmed that Anna was still sleeping, and it was not her who had the door open. Now fully awake, I decided to get out of my bed and check it out. Once I got past the foot of my bed, the doorway entered my view, and I was shocked by what I saw. The door was indeed open a crack, just as much as the chain would allow, and an arm was reaching through the crack, fumbling around trying to undo the chain that was the only thing keeping the door from being completely open. Instincts and adrenaline took over for me immediately. I ran towards the door and slammed my whole body weight against it, forcefully closing the door onto the arm that was still reaching through the crack. I heard a grunt on the other side, and the arm withdrew from the crack, and whoever was on the other side vanished. Anna, who was awoken by all the commotion, called the police, alerting them that there was an attempted intruder at the motel we were staying at. It was close to 5 a.m. now, and even though it was early, Anna and I agreed to pack up our stuff and hit the road. As we left our motel room, the police were already at the front desk talking to the worker. We were approached by a cop and asked if we were okay and if we saw who the culprit was. The man who was working at the front desk also appeared and kept repeating that he didn't see anyone while he was working. Funny enough though, he was holding his right arm very gingerly, and even when he wasn't holding it pretending to cross his arms, it hung oddly at his side. Right before heading out, we informed the cops that we suspected it was the guy working at the front desk who was attempting to enter our room. They told us they would look into it, and that's the only information we were given before we drove off, continuing our journey. I have no idea if they ever confirmed that the man working at the front desk had been the one attempting to enter our room. It was comforting to me, though, that even if the man didn't face any legal actions for that night, I had either broke his arm or severely injured it. Perhaps that would stop him from trying anything crazy like that again. A group of friends and I took a vacation to France together to enjoy the sights and party a bit. The hotel we were staying in for a couple of nights was fairly nice, and we were happy with it for the price that we had spent. It wasn't a super luxurious high-class hotel, but it had some amenities and was decent. The last night of our trip, we went out as a group to party and have a good time. We arrived back to our hotel late, but since it was the last night of the trip, we stayed up, still talking in the hotel room and drinking a little more. Suddenly, there was a loud banging at the door. We all got quiet, and one of my friends went to look through the peephole into the hallway, but they didn't see anything. We realized that we had gotten pretty loud possibly, as we were all drunk. It must have been another guest nearby being fed up and trying to shut us up. It was close to 3 a.m. now, so we lowered the volume of our voices and began to prepare for bed. 5 minutes after the knock, we heard more knocking at our door. This time, we were positive that we were not being too loud anymore, and once again my friend went to go check the peephole. This time, there was a guy standing outside the door. We all took turns staring through the peephole, and the man just stood there, waiting for us to open the door, I guess. The man knocked again, still waiting for us to open the door. My friend Audrey spoke to the man without opening the door. She asked, "Can we help you?" The man on the other side of the door responded, saying that he had a wallet that one of us had dropped from the club earlier that night. We frantically searched our belongings, checking to see whose wallet we had lost. After a short search, we all stared at each other silently in confusion. None of us were missing a wallet or ID or anything. Everything was accounted for. I watched through the peephole as Audrey told the man that we weren't missing anything and that it must be someone else's wallet. The man didn't move at all, standing frozen outside of our door. He knocked 2 more times within a span of 3 minutes. We called the front desk at the hotel. We asked them to come up to our room and deal with the guy who was still standing outside of our door and asking us to open the door so he could give us the wallet. 2 staff members came up to our room and dealt with the guy. As they tried to gently push the man away from our door to exit the building, he tried to fight them. The man squared up and attempted to throw multiple punches before being taken to the ground by the 2 workers. Eventually, law enforcement came and took him away. This guy who had been attempting to enter our room clearly had something wrong with him, and it was unsettling that he had been watching and following us the whole night from the club all the way back to our hotel room. I was traveling alone for a business conference, and the budget didn't stretch to high-end hotels. I found a small, inexpensive one online, situated on the edge of a town. It looked decent enough in the photos, though they were clearly outdated. The reviews were mixed. Some people had good experiences, and others complained about odd noises and strange happenings. I shrugged it off as an exaggeration. I was only going to be there a couple of nights, and I figured that I wouldn't have any problems. The check-in process when I got there was very uneventful. The clerk was an elderly man who didn't say much beyond handing me the key. I headed to my room, which was at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The carpet was worn, and the walls had patches where the paint was peeling. The hotel was definitely older than the pictures online showed, and needed some serious renovations. I went about my usual routine of unpacking, setting up my laptop, and getting some work done. Around 10 p.m., I decided to get some rest. The bed was uncomfortable, but I managed to fall asleep fairly quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud banging noise coming from the room next door, though. It was relentless, like someone was hitting the wall or furniture repeatedly. I thought about calling the front desk, but decided against it because I was very tired and I hoped that it would stop soon. The banging persisted, though. It was unnerving, but I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. Just when I started to drift off again, I heard something that made me sit up in bed. There was a faint whispering coming from the hallway. It was soft but distinct enough to make out words like help and please. I told myself it was probably just someone talking loudly outside, maybe even another guest who was drunk or having an argument. I got up to check the hallway. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing unusual. The corridor was empty and quiet now, except for a distant hum of what I assumed was the old heating system. I returned to bed feeling a bit uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. I closed my eyes and finally fell asleep. The next morning, I noticed the door to my room was slightly open. I was sure that I had closed it properly before going to sleep. I brushed it off as me being forgetful. When I went downstairs for breakfast, I asked the elderly clerk at the desk if he had any idea about the noises from the previous night. He just gave me a non-committal nod and said he didn't know. I spent the day at the conference trying to forget the night's disturbances. By the evening, I was back at the hotel and exhausted. I had hoped for a quiet night, but when I entered my room, I noticed something odd. My laptop, which had been on the desk when I left, was now on the bed. I hadn't touched it after finishing my work. That night, I was more cautious. I made sure everything was secure and tried to get some sleep. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud crash. It sounded like something heavy had fallen in the room next door. I didn't want to deal with the banging and whispering again, so I tried to stay calm. I could hear faint footsteps moving around in the corridor, but I didn't want to investigate. Then I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the closet. I was too scared to get up, so I laid in bed, wide awake, listening. The scratching continued, growing louder and more frantic. It felt like something or someone was trying to get out. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and opened the closet. There was nothing inside but a few old hangers and some extra blankets. The next morning, I packed up quickly, relieved to be done with the place. As I checked out, I asked the clerk if there had been any recent issues with the rooms. He looked at me with a somber expression and said that sometimes guests reported strange experiences. He didn't offer any further explanation. I did some research later and found out that the hotel had a history of being associated with accidents and unexplained events. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but I'm glad that I don't have to stay there again. I used to work the night shift at a small hotel by the highway. It's usually quiet after midnight, just a few late arrivals and the occasional call. This one night was different. It started with a phone call at 1 a.m. The voice on the phone said, "I need a room." I checked the reservation system, but we were fully booked for the night already. I responded saying that we didn't have any vacancies for tonight and asked if they had a reservation. The voice did not answer right away. Finally, all they responded with was that they needed a room and it was important. Without a reservation, I couldn't give them a room, but I informed them of nearby hotels available before hanging up. About an hour later, a man walked in. I greeted him and he handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It had a room number on it. Scratched on the paper was the room 217 and a note saying, "I need this room. No one else should know." I looked at him feeling uneasy. I responded with, "I'm sorry, but room 217 isn't available right now." The man didn't say anything. He just pulled out a stack of cash and slammed it on the counter, nodding to me to take it as a bribe, I guess. I was getting more uncomfortable, but boldly stated that I couldn't help him without an ID or a reservation, and I asked him to leave if he didn't have either of those. He looked at me for a long moment and then turned and walked out. I felt a shiver as the door closed behind him. I decided to check the security monitors, and everything seemed normal as far as I could tell. At 3 a.m., I heard a loud bang from upstairs. I grabbed the master key card and went to investigate. When I reached the second floor, I noticed that the door to room 217 was slightly ajar. My heart started racing. I pushed the door open a bit more and peered inside. The room was dark, but I saw enough to know something was wrong. The bed was messed up, and there was a handkerchief on the floor stained with something dark. I backed away quickly. I saw movement at the end of the hallway and turned to see the man from earlier standing there. I didn't wait any longer or try to confront him. Instead, I ran back downstairs and called the police. When they arrived, the man was gone. They checked the hotel security footage, but the video from that time was corrupted. They didn't find anything else in room 217 except the handkerchief. I never found out what happened. The police couldn't explain it, and I was left feeling uneasy. I ended up moving on from working at that hotel a couple of months later, and was glad to be able to put that night out of my mind. One October night many years ago, when we were young adults, my friend Mike and I were driving back after a fun road trip. We ended up checking into a hotel later in the evening as we weren't going to make it all the way home and didn't want to drive through the night. Mike and I decided to unwind in the hot tub at the hotel because there wasn't anything to do really in the small town we were staying in. We had been on the road all day, and the warmth of the hot tub was exactly what we needed. After checking in at the front desk, we changed into our swimsuits and headed down to the outdoor pool area. The pool itself was closed for maintenance, I think some sort of chemical treatment, but the hot tub was open. The night was clear and the stars were visible, but the area around the hot tub was poorly lit, casting long shadows over everything. Mike and I settled into the tub. It actually ended up being exactly what we needed to unwind before bed. We talked about our day, our plans for the next day, and just caught up on life. After a while, the conversation drifted into more trivial things, such as our old high school days, funny incidents, and random stuff. As we talked, we noticed a figure on the edge of the pool area. At first, we thought it was just someone from another room coming out for a late-night dip. But as time passed, the figure didn't move. It was just a man, just standing there looking at us. I whispered to Mike, asking if he saw that, motioning towards the guy near the edge of the pool. Mike squinted through the dim lighting and responded that he could see him. He asked me what he was doing, but I couldn't make out much. The figure was tall and wearing dark clothing. I could see the silhouette clearly, but the person's face was obscured by the darkness. I wasn't sure if the figure was just deciding if they wanted to swim in the pool, even though it was closed, or something else. We continued our conversation, trying to ignore the stranger, but it was hard not to feel uneasy. The man did not move. He just stood there, as if he was waiting for something. Finally, Mike decided to call out. He asked the man if he was waiting for the pool, and said that it was closed. There was no response from the man, and he didn't even flinch. His presence made everything feel tense. Mike glanced at me, indicating that we should maybe go inside for the night. I nodded in agreement. We started getting out of the hot tub, but just then, the man turned and walked away. He moved slowly, almost deliberately. It was odd. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. We watched him disappear into the dark, and we didn't speak until he was out of sight. Then we went to our room and locked the door behind us, making sure that the chain was also secured. We joked about it, trying to laugh off the strange encounter, but neither of us could shake the feeling of unease. We turned off the lights and went to bed, but neither of us slept well. In the morning, we were eager to leave. We packed up our things, and after turning in our keys at the front desk, we were on our way. A few days later, Mike showed me an article in the paper about a man who had been found dead in the area near the hotel. It was ruled an accident, but the details were chilling. He had been living in the woods nearby and frequently came to the hot tub of the hotel. His body had been found floating in the pool that was closed off for maintenance. We never saw the face of the man who was at the pool with us that night, so we couldn't determine if it was the same guy who was pictured in the paper. Regardless though, the man who was watching us that one night by the pool had either been killed or killed someone, or perhaps something else. Last year, I was driving on a road trip and was going to be gone for a few days. On the second night, I was sort of in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know where I would stay for the night, but I was hoping to find a hotel. But the more I was driving, the less it seemed I was near any kind of a city. The coverage on my phone was also going in and out all night. Finally, at probably 11 o'clock, I pulled into a rest area and looked up hotels in the nearby area. The closest one was a motel that was 12 miles down the road. I decided that that would be just fine with me. I was really tired, and then I left the rest stop to head for the motel. It took maybe 10 minutes to get there, and it was about a mile off the highway. It was in a very small town that really didn't have much of anything. The motel looked quite creepy, to be honest with you. It was old, small, and had a little office connected to the side of the building. There was just one level of rooms, with maybe 10 or 12 total. I pulled into the parking lot, which was nearly empty. Normally, I wouldn't want to stay here, but it was just for a quick night's rest. I would be out of there by 6 or 7 in the morning, and the rates for the night were just $29, which was honestly overpriced. So after parking, I walked to the office to get my room. When I walked in, a man with a longer beard sat behind the counter. He sat up in his chair and asked me what I wanted. I told him I would like a room and then gave him the $29. He then handed me a key and told me my room number. Then he leaned back in his chair again. I left his office and walked down to my room. When I got to my room, I went inside, and it was about what I expected. Not very clean, and old, outdated furniture in the room. The TV was a box TV, but I was lucky that they had one at all. I pretty much just got ready for bed and then tried falling asleep. After laying down in the bed, I was there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and starting to doze off. That's when I got this weird feeling. I opened my eyes and turned over in bed. When I turned over, I faced the window. That's when I saw somebody moving away from the window. It wasn't like they were walking by though. It was like they had been looking in. I saw it for just a split second and couldn't tell who they were at all. I got up from my bed and closed the curtains, which had been opened, but that didn't really do much good. They were cheap and didn't reach all the way. Plus, the curtains were so thin that you could sort of see through them, but it was the best that I could do. I looked out the window as well, but didn't see anything. Whoever looked inside was gone now. I got back in bed and laid down. I tried falling asleep again, but that kind of ruined it for me. Now I wasn't as relaxed as before. I was still tired though, and after maybe 10 minutes, I was finally able to feel relaxed once more. But then I got the feeling again, like I was being watched or something. I was facing the window laying down this time, so I opened my eyes and looked to the window. I could see somebody was there again. At first, I didn't see them much because of the curtains, but then I saw a man's head for just a split second. He then moved out of sight once more and away from the window. I couldn't tell who he was at all because of how dark it was and how I only saw him for about a split second. I got up and walked over to the window again. I looked outside, but the person was gone. I was really freaked out that some creep was looking in my window. I stayed at the window for a few minutes looking around, but I didn't see anybody, so I then decided to go back to bed again. My door was locked and I covered the window as best as I could. So all I could do now was try to go back to sleep. I got back in bed and closed my eyes again. This time it took even longer. Maybe 20 minutes later, I was finally able to sleep. I don't know how long I was sleeping for, but I do know that I woke up sometime later. What I remember was hearing the sound of my door opening up. The door was old and cheap, so it squeaked a lot. Instantly, I became wide awake. I sat up and looked to the doorway. I saw some guy entering, and at first had no idea who he was. Once more, when he saw me, he quickly left out the door and ran away. It was after he left that I realized who it was. It was the guy who was working at the motel. I got out of my bed, packed all of my stuff, which didn't take me very long. Then I left the motel and got into my car. I drove away and went back onto the highway, and later stopped at another rest area. I slept in my car there for the rest of the night. As crazy as it sounds, I felt a lot safer there than in that motel room. The next morning, I called the motel and tried to report the guy. However, I was hung up on when I started complaining, so after that, I called the police and told them what happened. I'm not sure exactly what they did about it. The man running the place was a total creep. I'm really glad that I'm a light sleeper and woke up when he opened the door. I don't know what he was planning to do. I hope he doesn't do that to anybody else. A few years ago, I was traveling by myself. I took a flight to Phoenix for some business that I hoped to do there. For the 2 nights that I would be in town, I was staying outside of downtown in a pretty standard hotel. It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't some cheap place either. It was perfectly fine and had the basic bed, TV, desk, chair, and bathroom. After I checked in, I got my room key and went inside. I had a couple of hours before I had to go anywhere, so I went on my laptop in my room. Then I left for a few hours. I was out in the city, and when I came back to my hotel room, it was night. After arriving back, I entered my room again and set my stuff down. It was exactly at this moment when I saw a man stand up from behind my bed. I had no idea who he was. The man was wearing a black sleeveless shirt and jeans and was bald with a goatee. I asked him what he was doing in here. The man did not say anything, but started to slowly walk towards me. I backed away and then went for the door. He actually chased after me as I did this. I got out of the room and into the hallway. Then I ran to the left where the front doors were. After making it to the lobby, I saw that the guy was not chasing me anymore. I told the employee at the front desk about the situation. She said that she would call the police, and I waited in the lobby until they got there. The entire time waiting, we didn't see the guy. The police got there within probably 10 minutes. Then they searched my room, which the man was gone from now. They also searched throughout the entire hotel. He had left though, probably through one of the back exits. After going back to my room, I was happy to see that none of my things were stolen. It was still very creepy though. After that, I was safely back in my hotel room. But when all of the commotion was gone, the police had left, and I was by myself. Probably about an hour later, I glanced out my window. I saw the man walking through the parking lot. My window looked out to the back parking area. The parking lot there had not nearly as many cars as the one out front. That parking lot also backed up to the rear of a couple of nearby businesses. He was walking from the hotel parking lot to a parking lot of another business. Then he went out of my sight. I thought about reporting him or something, but figured that he would be gone again by the time anybody got there. That night, I made sure that my door was locked and my window was covered. The rest of the time I stayed there was fine though, and I did not see the man again. I still wonder though what he was doing in my room and how he got in there. It's possible that he was in the room with me for the couple of hours that I was there after arriving. He could have come in after as well. I may never know. This is a story of the last time that I stayed in a hotel. It happened over this past summer. I was staying in a hotel a little ways outside of a major city. The hotel was decent, and I would say slightly nicer than most. I remember after I got there, I checked into my room and then left almost immediately after. I was out for several hours until a little bit later at night. I finally returned back at I think about 10 p.m. to the hotel. My room was on the second floor, and after I got back up to it, I realized that I couldn't find my key. I quickly found out that I didn't have it on me and that it was lost. I went back downstairs to the front desk and was able to get another one. Then I went back up and entered my room. I was pretty tired and decided to just go to bed. I got ready and then fell asleep within probably 20 minutes. I wasn't sleeping for very long though. The next thing I remember was waking up. It sounded like my doorknob was turning or something. I was confused, but then I heard the sound of the door starting to open. I had no idea why that would be happening. They wouldn't clean my room at almost midnight. I looked over, but couldn't see the door because of where I was in bed. The bathroom was at the front of the room, so there was a little hallway and I couldn't see around the corner. As I got up, I heard the door closing. Moments later, I walked over to where I could see, but nobody was there. I realized that somebody must have started to enter the room and then stopped. I didn't know why though, and I didn't know who would do that. I was really creeped out by this situation. So I walked over to the door and looked out of the peephole. I still saw nobody. I figured whoever it was had walked away. I was going to go back to bed and I turned to my left. When I did, I faced the bathroom for just a second. All of the lights in my room were off except for a little lamp by my bed, so it was really dark. But inside the bathroom, I saw there was somebody in there, and whoever it was looking at me. I instantly turned back and opened up the door. Then I ran out of the room. I went down the hallway to the stairs and then went down them back to the lobby. Once I was in the lobby, I told the person at the front desk that somebody was in my room. They went back up with me, but when we got there, the person was gone. After that, though, I decided to get a new room. I moved all of my stuff, and luckily they had an open room on the 3rd floor. The rest of the night was fine. I still don't know who that person was. I realize now that I probably dropped my key somewhere in the hotel or around it. This person probably picked it up and then could get access to my room. They went in the bathroom instead of walking right into the room, and that's where they were hiding when I saw them. I'm really glad that I switched rooms after that, and I'm also glad that I noticed them when I did. few years back, I found myself driving down a quiet old highway late at night. I had to travel for work, and sadly they didn't fly me out, so I had to drive. I would get compensated though, which was nice, but I still didn't like such long driving. Now, I had originally planned on stopping in a city and getting a hotel there, but I was making such good time that I drove right past it and kept going. By that point, I was kind of winging it, because I didn't know where the next major city was, and not even major city like big city, but just a city with a decent hotel and some other businesses in it. By the time it was midnight, I finally started to get tired, and was now almost 5 hours ahead of schedule. That was good, but now I had no clue where I was going to stay. I took an exit to get some gas. I figured I could drive for another hour or so if I needed to. But after fueling my car, I saw a sign for an old motel down the road. I'm not too picky, and the motel didn't look that nice, but it honestly could have been worse. Without very high expectations, I drove over to the motel and got a room for the night. It was a pretty standard 2-level motel, with each room facing the parking lot and opening right up to it. There was a sidewalk in front of the rooms on the first level, and a walkway on the second one as well. I ended up getting a room on the first level at the far end. So after I got the room key, I got my things and headed inside. The room was actually nicer than I expected. There was a decent-sized cable TV, the bathroom was in the back, and the room was clean. The bed was also pretty comfortable. I took a shower and then got in bed and decided to watch some TV until I got really sleepy. I would say about 30 minutes later, there was a sudden knock on the door. This was really odd, but I wasn't afraid of anything, or so I thought. I got up out of bed and walked over to the door. Then I opened it up. There was a man standing there. He looked somewhat tall and skinny. He had longer hair and a beard. The man said hi, and I asked him what he wanted. His speech was slightly slurred, and I suspected alcohol. The man then asked me if he could come inside just for a few minutes. I didn't know why he thought I would let him in my motel room. I said no, and then I shut the door in his face. After I did, I could tell that he was just standing there, and I hoped that he would go away. I went back over to my bed and sat down. I glanced over, but I couldn't see the guy anymore. I hoped that he was gone. But like 30 seconds later, he knocked on the door again. I yelled at him to go away. Then I walked over to the window and looked. I saw him walking away on the sidewalk in front of the rest of the rooms. I was thinking to myself that I hope he doesn't bother other people, and hopefully nobody lets him in their rooms. Then I sat back down on the bed. Probably 5 minutes after this, I noticed movement out of my window. I looked over and saw that the guy was back. He was standing right outside and was holding what looked like some kind of pipe object. I really didn't know what it was. But then he swung it at my window and it made a really loud noise. The window didn't break at first though. He hit it several more times before I heard glass starting to break. I realized then that this guy must have been insane, and he was probably going to get in. I really had nothing to fight him off with, so I got up from my bed, grabbed my phone, keys, and wallet, and ran to the back. Then I got inside of the bathroom and locked myself in there. I heard him repeatedly hitting my window and glass breaking. I called the police and told them what was going on. They said that they would get there as soon as possible. My only fear was that the guy would somehow be able to break the bathroom door. This was a somewhat cheap motel, so I wasn't sure how good a quality the door was. After a couple of minutes of him whacking the window, he made his way inside. I heard him hitting random things in the room. He hit the TV, and I know he hit some walls and other stuff. I remained hidden in the bathroom. Soon, though, he made his way towards the back. He whacked the bathroom door a few times, and then went back into the other area of the room. After about another minute, he went back towards the bathroom. Then I heard sirens. I knew it was just a matter of time before the police got there now. The sirens didn't seem to scare the guy off. Instead, he was still hitting things. The police arrived within a minute after that, and started yelling at the guy to stop. Soon, I finally heard him stop hitting things. The police were able to get him, and I came out from the bathroom. I saw that the room was all torn up. He certainly succeeded in breaking things. At least he didn't hurt anybody, though. After that, I obviously had to get a new room. The rest of the night went well, though. The next morning, I was back on the road. That was by far my craziest hotel experience. For a little bit of background, I'm a female, and this took place last year. I was staying in a hotel for a few days. I had a room on the second floor, and the hotel was very large, but not super fancy. They had a good breakfast that was free for guests and was on the first floor. There was a lot of things that I was going to do in the city I was staying in. I had several friends in the area, and I was excited to visit with them. After arriving the first day, I spent some time with my friends and then returned to the hotel. I pretty much went straight to bed that night. The next morning, I got up and went down to get some breakfast. It was pretty busy, and a lot of other people were also getting food. I sat by myself in a small table in the corner. I was next to a window, but I was facing the rest of the people there. When I was sitting there, I noticed there was this one guy staring at me. He was sitting across all the way to the other side of the room. This guy was also sitting by himself. At first, I didn't think he could be looking at me, but probably something else that was close to me. I looked around, but there really wasn't anything else there. For some reason, I think he was staring at me. He looked away a few times, but his eyes would return to me every so often. He wasn't smiling or anything either, but kept a straight face. The man appeared somewhat young, but was about average height and somewhat thin. He was also wearing a black short-sleeved shirt and black pants. He didn't appear to be eating anything either. He was just sitting there and staring in my direction. I stayed there for another 10 minutes or so. Then I decided to go back to my room. I was in my room for maybe an hour before leaving and meeting up with my friends again. I was gone for basically the entire day. I didn't arrive back at my hotel until late, probably around midnight. After getting back, things were very quiet inside. But I noticed just past the lobby in the breakfast room, the same guy was sitting in there. He was at a table, just kind of looking around, when I walked sort of by him to the hallway, and he looked at me. It was kind of strange to see him again, especially at this hour. After I passed him by, I went to the elevator and took it up to the second floor. Then I walked down that hallway to my room. I entered and then took a shower and was going to go to bed. But I was really thirsty and realized that I didn't have any water. I really didn't want to drink the water from the sink in the bathroom. I just personally hate drinking tap water. I knew there was a vending machine down the hallway, so I decided to go there. When I got to the door, I looked out of the peephole first though. I really don't know why. It's just a habit that I sometimes do. But when I did, I saw the same man, the one who had been staring at me at breakfast and again when I got back to the hotel. He was just standing there outside of my door in the hallway. I had no clue why he was here or what he was doing. I watched him for about 10 seconds, and he just kind of stood around. Then I quietly moved away from the door. I was really creeped out and didn't know what to do. For a few minutes, I was trying to figure out what the guy could possibly be doing. I was trying to think of logical explanations in my head, but I really didn't have any. After about 5 minutes, I went back over to the door and looked. He was finally gone. I very carefully opened up the door and looked. I checked both ways down the hallway, and the coast was clear. So I walked down to the end where the vending machines were. As I was getting my water there, it was very quiet. When I finally got the water, I picked it up and started walking back to my room. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. They were a ways back. I walked faster, and then when I was about halfway to my room, looked over my shoulder. It was the same guy. He was still a far distance away, but definitely following me. I continued to walk quickly to my door, but my heart was now racing. I knew that if I had any kind of mishap when entering my key card, the man might catch up to me, and we all know that hotel key cards can be really hard to get to work sometimes. I finally made it to my door, and thank goodness the card worked perfectly. I got inside and then swiftly shut the door in one fast motion. Just about a second later, the knob started to turn, but it was locked. I looked out and saw the same guy there again. What on earth did he want? After that, there was a quiet knock at the door. There was no way that I was going to answer it. Instead, I went to the phone and called the front desk. I reported the guy and gave his description. I was told that they would look into it. Then I just waited inside my room. About a minute or two later, I looked through my peephole and the guy was gone. But I saw a hotel employee walking down the hallway. I left my room and told the employee what had happened. He said that he would keep an eye out for the man. After that, I went to bed. It took a while to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next morning, I was told by hotel management that they located the man in the hotel the previous night. When questioned, he ran. However, he did not leave, but hid somewhere else inside the hotel. He was later spotted hiding in the breakfast room behind a table. The police got called on the guy, and eventually he was arrested for refusing to leave. When I heard that, it was a huge relief. It's crazy to think that the guy wasn't even staying at the hotel. He was just hanging around and causing problems. I still don't know why he was after me specifically though. The rest of my trip went great, but the experience still creeps me out whenever I remember it.